Hi, this is my case study, Internet Use of Violations, for EDL 850. So let's get started. So what do we know about the case? So we know that this was at a high school, and the high school was in a very well-off school district. Many of the parents to the kids were lawyers, doctors, high up in companies. So the students have all the latest new technology, all the latest new clothes. We also know that this is Miss Tate's first year. She was hired there to teach a specialized science class. We also know that while this is her first year teaching, she's completed her undergrad, her master's, and another year of postgrad. But while she is very well qualified for the position, she doesn't have the best techniques when it comes to reducing stress in her classroom and just communicating and having that overall communication like with her students and the rapport with her class. So Dr. Smith, he's the principal there, and he's very proud of his reputation at his school and just being in communication with parents. So he decided to help Miss Tate, and he just offered her some advice of how to reduce stress in her class and interact with students. But we know that Miss Tate, as far as we know, had not taken that advice. So one night, Miss Tate comes home and she sees an email telling her to go to a website. So once on the website, she just finds very offensive remarks about her, and she also finds out something that kind of makes her feel like they've threatened her life. So she calls Dr. Smith and lets him know what has transpired. And he lets her know that they're going to look into this and they're going to involve the district technologist on this and try to figure out where this has come from, student, parent, who was it that did this. Miss Tate also says she thinks she knows who might have done it, but this is just an assumption she has. So now what do we need to know? So some things we need to know is we need to know if the person who created the site actually wants to hurt Mrs. Tate or if it's more so just a prank. We also need to know if the person who created the website was a student, was it multiple students in on this, like who knew that this was happening. We also need to know if the person or persons who created this used a district computer or an at-home device. And lastly, we also need to know if there's a school district policy for threats such as these that are created towards teachers or anyone in a school district. So overall, the problem that I found here, there's a couple. So one problem is that someone is threatening Miss Tate and we don't know who it is. The next problem is we don't know if the threats are serious or if they're just using the threat part as a prank. We also know that one of the problems is that Miss Tate is not feeling safe. She doesn't feel safe to stay at her own house, and she's going to be driving 3 hours to stay with her parents. We don't know if the tech department is going to be able to trace who did this, and that's a problem because it could just keep reoccurring again and again unless the problem is solved. So the plan that I proposed is the first step is we need to make Miss Tate feel safe. After we've done that, we need to make copies of the information on the site in case it's taken down by the person who did this. Next, we need to contact the superintendent in the tech department. And then I would also start interviewing students that are in that class, trying to gather information on what they know. And then if the person is found, and once that person is found, they need to determine what the punishment will be for that person or persons who did it. And then lastly, I think as the principal, we would need to discuss with Miss Tate about trying some of the techniques that have been given her to lower the stress in her classroom and develop that rapport with her class, because that seems to be something that is very important here. And we want to promote the academic success and the personal well-being of all students and Miss Tate herself. So some strategies, excuse me, to implement. So the very first one is making Miss Tate feel safe. So some things to do is she's going to be driving 3 hours to her parents. So a solution could be, is there a closer relative she could go to or a friend that she could stay with? If there's not, is this even the district's job to be in charge of her not feeling safe? Who is responsible for her well-being and not feeling safe as a school employee in the district? And then last, if neither of those, maybe offer for her to come in later to work. If she's going to be driving 3 hours back up to her parents to stay, she's going to have to drive 3 hours back. And you don't want her driving on little sleep. That could cause a car accident. Many other things could happen. The next one, another strategy for implementing my plan, is we need to make copies of everything that was found on the website. So we need records in case someone decides to remove it. We also want to print everything from this site and also make copies of it. That way there's more than one copy in case anything would happen to one of the originals. We also need to get the email from Ms. Tate that directed her and prompted her to go to the site in the first place. Some other strategies to implement would be to contact the superintendent in the tech department. We need to show them the email and the website page so they're in the loop about what's going on. We need to discuss what further actions need to be done and discuss some first steps for the tech department to figuring out who is behind this and how they can possibly solve who did this. Next would be interviewing the students. So when back on Monday, just asking individual students if anyone in particular does not like Miss Tate or they know about a website being made. Also discussing with the other faculty if they've heard anything, just when students are talking in the hallway, they've seen anything. And then also it would probably be a good place to have technology just looking on the school computers for anything that could lead them to a suspect or someone who has done this. So the next one would be when the person is found, we need to start with having them remove the website. Also apologizing to Ms. Tate for the anxiety and stress they've caused her and the fear that they've caused her that someone is wanting to maybe possibly take her life. And then determining what the district policy, if there is a punishment for this situation or if it's based school by school. And then last, after all that has been taken care of, it would just be with discussing with Ms. Tate her teaching, starting with telling her what a qualified teacher she is, but how she also needs to be able to connect with her students in a class. And that as a teacher, it is very important that you get to know your students. We also need to discuss how, no matter how qualified, that you expect all faculty members to communicate and form healthy relationships, and this includes her as well. So then my resolution. So my resolution to all these problems would be making the person who created this website remove it. Also, not just the students, but also talking to Ms. Tate and telling her she needs to try some of the strategies to communicate with her students and form those healthy relationships. Also discussing with Ms. Tate and all students involved what the punishment is going to end up being, keeping them in the loop and not just blindsiding them and saying this is what's going to happen, making sure Ms. Tate agrees with it and all the students understand what's going to be expected of them. And then also after all of that, just having a whole school meeting, maybe we need to review like how to act on the internet, use technology at school and at home. So then the problem, just some debriefing. So I'm thinking that the person who did this definitely was in the wrong. But Ms. Tate also needs to take, I feel like, her principal's advice on how to communicate with her students and make sure she's forming that rapport. It sounds like there's a lot of high stress that's going on in her classroom. And it's causing students, a lot of them want to be valedictorians, so there's just a lot of rivalry going on. I'm feeling that multiple students are probably involved on this or at least know about it, and that a class lesson on just like using the internet probably needs to be reviewed. I value how the principal acted. I feel like he remained very calm. When Miss Tate called him, he didn't, all of a sudden jump to conclusions that the boy she accused did it. But he also made Miss Tate feel reassured and that he was listening to her and he was taking the situation seriously. I also feel that there are still many issues that are unresolved. One, I feel like this could happen again if they don't find out who did it. And even if they did, if they're still feeling that way towards Miss Tate. I feel like Miss Tate, she's still going to need to work on her communication and her relationships in her classroom. And there may be some students that are slightly involved that aren't caught. Maybe they didn't create the website, but they had something to do with it. They agreed that it should be done. Some part in it, and they might not find out everyone who did it. All right, so now some educational leadership. So I believe one of the main parts is integrity. And so for this one, as the educational leader, It's important that the knowledge that we promote the success of every student by acting with integrity. So I think being upfront with your superintendent of the situation that's going on with your school, not trying to hide anything. You need to let them know what's going on. I also think it's important to see what the student handbook states about situations such as this. That way you're addressing the situation how it's been written that you should. And just including all party members, not leaving people in the dark or being left out. So including Mrs. Tate on what's going on, keeping the superintendent in the loop, keeping the tech department in the loop, and then once you have found out students that are involved, keeping them in the loop of what's going to happen. So the next one's very important, that every student, acting with fairness and applying the knowledge that you have towards this. So just making sure you're listening to everyone that's involved, listening to Mrs. Tate, listening to all the students and how they're feeling. I also think it's important not to accuse people solely on what Ms. Tate is telling you. She doesn't have any facts so far. It's just an assumption of a child that she feels like doesn't like her in the class. But also not dismissing how Ms. Tate is feeling, and also not dismissing how Ms. Tate's not using your suggestions or trying to change her classroom atmosphere. She just keeps doing it the same way. And the last one would be ethical manner. So for this one, as an educational leader, you just want to make sure that the knowledge is promoted the success of every student by acting in that ethical manner. So that just means following what the student handbook states. So if there is a policy of how to deal with this, that you are following that. Asking for advice from your board and superintendent on if they feel there's a certain way that the district should handle these situations. And just making sure you're treating all students the same, and be sure other students understand what will happen if this occurs again or if they do something similar. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thanks. Bye.